So what we're going to be doing, the reason we've called it Bringing All Back Home, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at ancient traditional Buddhist teachings, myths, symbols, images, and asking, well, what do they mean for us? What do they mean for us in Sheffield in the 21st century? How is this relevant to the world we live in today and the sort of lives we live today? The Buddha's teachings were given in a very, very different world. And the people he gave them to were from a very, very different culture. They used not only a very different language, they actually had a different way of looking at the world. They thought differently. The whole background of the way they understood the world was different from ours. The way they saw the meaning of life was different from ours. Their whole worldview was different from ours. So these ancient teachings, they often need translating. They often need translating if they're going to have any meaning, any relevance to us. When I say translating, I don't just mean changing from one language to another. I mean they need translating from one culture to another, from one mindset to another, one worldview to another. Now, a lot of that translation of these traditional teachings into something that we can use has been done by the founder of our order, Sangharakshita. He was deeply versed in traditional Buddhism. He'd had experience, he was a monk for many years in the East, had experience of Southeast Asian, Chinese and Tibetan Buddhism, and a deep knowledge of Western culture as well. And I think a really sharp and perceptive understanding of what we're like, we Westerners, we modern Westerners, where we're what our strengths are, and also sometimes the areas where we're quite weak and where we really need to focus. So I think he's an excellent person to do some of this translating. So we'll often be looking at the way Sangharakshita has translated traditional teachings for our times and culture. But Sangharakshita is just one man, so sometimes we also need to do a bit of translation ourselves based on the sort of insight and approach that he's developed. So that's what we're going to be doing for the next few months. Just to fill you in if you weren't here last week, we're going to be travelling back to the distant past, sometimes 2,500 years ago, and grabbing a teaching and bringing it back home here to Sheffield in the 21st century and having a good look at it and thinking, well, maybe we need to polish that bit up and maybe bend it around. So last week, Satyajyoti introduced the theme, and she looked at some of the to kick off our theme, she looked at some of the traditional mythic accounts of the events leading up to the Buddha's enlightenment. At least I hope she did.
It was Mokshatara, actually.
It was Mokshatara?
That's what she did.
Oh, that's what she did. Good. I was on holiday last week. Okay, Mokshatara looked at some of the traditional stories about the events leading up to the Buddha's enlightenment. And asking, well, what are these weird stories with all this stuff going on, goddesses and demons and all sorts going on? What does all that mean? What does that mean? What are those stories actually trying to convey? And how is their meaning relevant to the way we practice the Dharma here and now, and the way we live here and now? So tonight, I'm going to move on a short space of time from the period just before the Buddha's enlightenment to the period just after the Buddha's enlightenment, and look at some of the stories that have come down to us about the Buddha during this period just after his enlightenment. And I'll be asking that question, what do these stories tell us about what the Buddha is like? So I think the title of my talk is, what is a Buddha like? It's not what is a Buddha like? It's, what is a Buddha like? What's it like to be enlightened? What's it like to be enlightened? Which is an important question if we want to be more enlightened ourselves. If we want to be more like an enlightened being, we need to know something about the qualities and the emotions and the mental states that characterize an enlightened being, so that we can cultivate those ourselves to grow more towards that goal. Now, I think if we were to ask the mythical person on the 95 bus, what is a Buddha like? What would we get? We'd get, oh, they're really calm, they're really serene. We might get they're really fat, which would be a complete misunderstanding, because that fat, supposedly Buddha figure is nothing to do with, well, no, it comes from a Buddhist culture, but it's a Chinese folk figure representing plenty and happiness. It's just, all the people who say, oh, you know, think that's a Buddha, that is just like mistaking Santa Claus for Jesus. It's exactly the same. It shows deep ignorance. Buddha wasn't fat. He was never fat. Sometimes he was very, very skinny. So they might say he was serene. They might say he was calm. You might even get he was compassionate from a very few people. And you might even get wise from a very few people. Wisdom, seeing things as they are. Well, actually, that is what characterizes a Buddha. The very word Buddha means awake. One who is awake. So a Buddha is somebody who is awake to the nature of reality when the rest of us are asleep and wandering around in a deluded dream. That's the idea. So yeah, you might get that. Yeah, because Buddha is a title. It means one who's awake. So those are the, some of those qualities were probably clearly illustrated by Mokshitara's talk last week. But I suspect that very few people would ever come up with the qualities that I'm going to try to illustrate tonight. Which is a great shame. Because these qualities, I think, are central to our understanding of what an enlightened being is like, what any sort of spiritually developed being is like, and also because these qualities are especially important to us because they're often denigrated and undervalued in our culture. Indeed looked down upon in our culture, discouraged, so they often don't come very easily to us. But we need to know these important qualities of enlightenment if we are going to cultivate them in ourselves to be able to move more towards enlightenment. So last week we heard, I didn't, but you did, we heard about the Buddha sitting all night in meditation under the Bodhi tree. Under this great tree, in an aura of peace and serenity, while Mara, this mythical being Mara, and his armies and his daughters were creating mayhem around him, and he sat in this beautiful aura of God, peaceful golden light where peacocks circled around him, and all the stuff that's being thrown around turned to flowers. And we heard about him calling the earth goddess to witness, to support him, which is what he's doing with the touching the earth mudra that we see there. And then finally, just as day dawned, breaking through into Buddhahood, breaking through to this clear, direct vision of the nature of reality. And now we're going to look at him after all these events, a newly enlightened being, digesting his experience, thinking about what it means, what it means for the way he's going to live, what it means for the way he is going to behave. So we can imagine him sitting on in deep meditation, deep in thought for quite some time. We're told in the tradition that he stayed in the same place around under the Bodhi tree or near it for 4 weeks. That's one version. Another version says 7 weeks. Some say 7 weeks. It was a long while ago. Room for error. And during this time, we're told he continually dwelt on his gratitude for the Bodhi tree, the tree under which he sat, for the fact that it had shaded and sheltered him and continued to shade and shelter him. So he dwelt on his gratitude. And when he wasn't seated in reflection and meditation, he circumambulated the Bodhi tree with an attitude of gratitude and respect and reverence. So his very first response, one of his very first responses after enlightenment was gratitude. Gratitude even to something that we might think of as non-sentient. So we'll hold back on that a bit. Let's park that a bit. We'll come back to that. Or how might one feel gratitude or even reverence to something that's non-sentient? And we'll come back to gratitude a bit later in the talk. So gratitude, reverence. There's also a mythic story. There's another mythic story about something that happened during those weeks after the Buddha's enlightenment. So we're told that the Buddha thought, having become enlightened, having had this amazing insight, direct experience of the nature of things, he thought, well, nobody's going to get this. I can't explain this. It's beyond words. It's like trying to explain. It would be like trying to give somebody an experience of the colour blue who'd been blind from birth just by explaining it to them. You can't do it. If you haven't had the experience, you cannot possibly know what it's like. No one will understand it. It's beyond words. There's no way I can express this in terms that ordinary people will understand. I can only use metaphors, and then they will take those metaphors literally and turn them into dogma, and it will become something harmful. They'll get in the way. So maybe I should just sit here in bliss and enjoy being enlightened. And then we're told, well, this very thought, maybe I won't teach, maybe I'll just sit and really, this is quite fun, that this thought sent shockwaves through the universe, sent shockwaves through the whole universe, right up to the highest heavens. It's like, no, it's a massive no. And it even disturbed Brahma, the great god, Brahma Sahampati, the great god. Even he was disturbed, the Lord of the 1,000 worlds. So this Brahma thought, well, we'll see about that. And he appeared to the Buddha in a great blaze of light. He appeared to the Buddha in a great blaze of light, and he begged him, please teach the Dharma. Please help beings to see the nature of things, help beings to see the truth. This is what the whole universe needs you to pass on. And then we're told Brahma Sahampati disappeared, and the Buddha had a vision. And in that vision, he saw the world as a huge, great, expansive lake. And on that lake was full of lotuses at different stages of development. So lotuses are like rather splendid water lilies, much more colourful and bigger, but they're a bit like water lilies in the sense that they grow in really grotty water. And yet they look absolutely, once they come out of the water, they're just absolutely pristine and beautiful and shining, and nothing of that muck sticks to them. And he said we're told he saw lotuses. Some lotuses were still right down in the mud. And some lotuses were a little way out of the mud. And some lotuses were getting up towards the surface, and they could see a little glimmer of light. And some lotuses were just ready to open and be filled with sunlight. And we're told that, he thought, well, there are some who are quite close. There are some who are quite close. And maybe I cannot express this vision. Maybe I cannot explain what this is in words. But what I can do is help lotuses to grow towards the light so that they can see it for themselves. Some are nearly ready, and others need to grow up from the mud, basically. I may not be able to tell people the real nature of the truth I've realised in a way that they can understand, but I can help them to grow towards the light so that they can see it for themselves. And I think, incidentally, this tells us something important about the Dharma, which is that most of the Dharma is a horticultural manual for the growing of lotuses. It is not an attempt to explain the nature of reality, or only sort of vaguely. It's an attempt to help us to grow, to become the sort of beings who can see the nature of reality for ourselves. Because the nature of reality can't be described any more than the colour blue can be described to somebody who's never seen it. And I think that has also got an important implication for us Westerners, because we tend to want to get on with it and get to the end. So we've got a tendency to, well, don't want to worry with all that. Give me insight. But what this is telling us, in a way, is that we need to grow towards that insight, and that's likely to be a gradual process, actually. It's likely to be a gradual process of us becoming the sort of beings, sort of strong, warm, creative, wise, really sane beings who can actually see the nature of things. That's a bit of a tangent. The main point of the story about Brahma is that the Buddha does decide to teach the Dharma. So he does decide to teach the Dharma. And Sangharakshita tells us that, of course, we shouldn't take this story literally. Okay, so if you're thinking, God appearing, I thought Buddhism didn't do things like that. Well, don't worry, we don't have to take it literally. It's a mythic way of expressing an inner truth. That's what mythic stories often are. They're ways of expressing an inner truth. It's often said that there's all these myths around the Buddha's enlightenment. You heard some last week. If you were here, you'll hear more today. And it's often said, well, if it just stuck to actual factual truth, what you would see is this rather scruffy guy goes and sits under a tree, sits there for a very long time, gets up and goes away again. But the myths actually tell us something about what really went on, because what really went on was internal. So we don't have to take the story literally. It's a mythic way of expressing a spiritual inner truth, which is that the Buddha, in a sense, was compelled by his enlightenment experience to teach, to help others to liberate themselves, to play his part in the evolution of consciousness on this planet. So what Sangharakshita says is that we could see the Brahma, the God figure, Brahma, who appears to the Buddha, as a manifestation within the Buddha's own mind of the deep forces of compassion and solidarity with all beings, which were part and parcel of his enlightenment. So according to Sangharakshita, there's no such thing, there could be no such thing as an individualistic enlightenment, an enlightenment that we were just disposed to enjoy for ourselves and everybody else could get on with it. Because enlightenment involves a deep experience of our connectedness with the world and with other people, so that our sense of separateness dissolves. We no longer see ourselves as separate. And sort of just focusing on oneself and refusing to sort of take any notice of the state that others are in would be just like the hand refusing to take a thorn out of the foot because they're different limbs. Well, it's not me. I haven't got a thorn. Why should I take it out of my foot? In fact, a very famous text uses this very analogy, saying the hand doesn't ignore the thorn in the foot because the hand and the foot are limbs of the same body. And in the same way, we cannot ignore the suffering of others because we are both limbs. We're all limbs of the same universe. So the Buddha inevitably does decide that to do what he can to help other people towards enlightenment. That is just part and parcel of the nature of enlightenment. So part of what he does, as he digests his experience for these 4 or 7 weeks, as he digests his experience meditating under the Bodhi tree, is to focus his powerful, enlightened mind on coming up with some words and some concepts and some practices that he can use to help these lotuses grow and to at least get a little glimmer of that light across. So he does that. He comes up with, this is how I'm going to teach the Dharma. This is how I'm going to present it. It's not, I can't express the absolute truth, but this is how I'm going to present this. And then he thinks, well, where should I start? Where should I start? Who shall I talk to first? Who shall I teach first? Who's going to be the first person to get the gift of the Dharma? So this is something completely new and wonderful has sort of shone into the world. Who am I going to give it to first? this great gift. And he thinks, the first person he thinks of is one of the meditation teachers who who taught him before he was enlightened. And he thinks, well, he couldn't guide me to full enlightenment, but I owe him a great debt of gratitude. I owe him a great debt of gratitude. He has but little dust in his eyes. He's close to opening in the sunshine. I'll go and talk to him. But then he realizes that he's dead. So quite often the Buddha knows things that knows things that we wouldn't know through senses that we don't have. Anyway, he knows that he's dead, so he thinks, oh, I won't do that. And then he thinks of the second meditation teacher that he had, and in exactly the same way he thinks, well, he couldn't guide me all the way to full enlightenment, but I owe him a great debt of gratitude. He's got but little dust in his eyes. He's close to opening in the sunshine. I'll go and talk to him. And then I think the story goes that he's dead as well. Very, very bad luck, these meditation teachers. I couldn't remember whether he was dead or just gone somewhere. Anyway, I won't teach him. And then he thinks of the five ascetics that he practiced ascetic practices with before he realized that punishing the body to free the soul was not going to be the way to liberation. So he had spent time with these people doing what was quite traditional in India at the time, which is literally trying to sort of, as it were, rise above the physical being by ascetic practices of all sorts, which included things like standing on one leg, sitting between two fires, not eating very much at all, etc., etc., etc. And these people had turned against him because he had turned against these ascetic practices. But he thinks of them with great gratitude. He thinks of them with great gratitude for the companionship and support that they gave him in the time they'd spent together. And he decides to go off and give them the gift of the Dharma. They're going to be the first people. So out of gratitude, he's going to go and talk to them. So these episodes after the Buddha's enlightenment, I'm going to include another one later, but these particular episodes, I think they tell us a lot about what a Buddha is like. They tell us a lot about the states of mind and qualities of an enlightened being, and therefore quite a lot about the states of mind and qualities that we need to develop and cultivate in ourselves if we want to be more like an enlightened being. So what we see the Buddha expressing here over and over again is gratitude and a strong sense of solidarity with the world and with other people, even the world around him. We see this response of gratitude and even reverence in his response to the Bodhi tree. It's an inanimate object. We see the deep sense of solidarity with others, symbolized, as it were, by this eruption of this God figure and the decision to go to all the trouble of teaching beings who aren't even going to understand. Help people to grow towards liberation, which is expressed mythically in that story, rather than enjoying the bliss of nirvana. And again, we see his gratitude in the way he wants to repay. He wants to repay these people who have benefited him in the past, the two meditation teachers, and even the five ascetics who turned against him, because they gave him companionship and support. So we can see from these episodes that an enlightened being lives, if you like, they live from the knowledge of their connectedness to the world around them and to other people. They live from the knowledge of their complete dependence on the world around them and other people, which in many images of the Buddha is represented by the begging bowl. The begging bowl is a great image of dependence. So the Buddha was completely dependent on the generosity of others. That was part of the practice of him and his bhikkhus, to put themselves completely in dependence on the generosity of others. And when some of his Sangha weren't exactly behaving in the best possible way, he would chastise them. You're wasting people's alms food. People are giving you alms food. You're not paying them back To pay them back, you need to practice, you need to develop yourself so that you're a resource for the world. So this this connectedness and this complete dependence on the world and other beings, which goes with that connectedness. An enlightened being also lives from the knowledge of the debt that we owe to the world and other people, which comes from the fact that we exist in this dependent way. And this recognition of connectedness and dependence shows itself as gratitude, and a desire to make a contribution oneself, to bring benefits into the world, to serve the world even. An enlightened being lives from that deep sense of solidarity with other beings, and even the world around them. And of course that gratitude, that sense of solidarity, they go together. They're two sides of the same coin. They come from a realization of the wisdom of an Atman, the wisdom of non-self. You'll remember that in the last week of the introductory course, we talk about the 3 marks of conditioned things, and one of the marks of conditioned things is non-self. That things do not exist as separate, independent entities. They exist more like eddies in a stream. They're completely part of the overall flux of things, constantly influenced by other things, constantly influencing other things. Cannot actually, they may have some entity of their own, but they also cannot be separated from the overall flux. They're constantly influenced by it. So, and that man tells us that nothing has separate, independent existence. And we don't have separate, independent existence either. We are not separate, independent individuals. We are an ever-changing process that's kept in existence and constantly influenced by the world around us. We're completely embedded in the world in the way that an eddy is completely embedded in a river. We don't exist separately. So to see an Atman is to see our connectedness to the world and our complete dependence on the goodness of the world, if you like, and the goodness of other people. These inevitably follow from a genuine insight into the nature of things. They're part and parcel of what an enlightened being is like, and cultivating them needs to be part and parcel of our path towards enlightenment, the way we grow towards enlightenment. They're aspects of the goal, they're also aspects of the path to the goal. So if we want to be able to be more like an enlightened being, we need to cultivate an awareness of the benefits we receive from others and our dependency on others, of the way we couldn't exist without the help and service of others. And we need to allow that recognition, that knowledge, to turn into a sense of gratitude and a desire. We need to let that sense of gratitude turn into a desire to make a contribution, to live more, to make our life more about what we can contribute and maybe a bit less about just what we can get for ourselves. And I think the way we do that is to become more aware, to simply become more aware. The Sanskrit name for gratitude, the way the normal word used for it, kritanyata, simply means recognition of benefits received. We're often just completely unaware of it. You probably remember from the intermediate class, we have an exercise where we write down everybody who's benefited us. And you might start out thinking, yeah. And it just goes on and on. It goes on and on. People often comment after it. Well, I've thought of people I haven't thought of for years. I just became so aware of how much benefit I've received from all sorts of different people. So the first step is to become aware. If we want to be more like an enlightened being, we need to live more from that sense of gratitude. And part of that is simply to become aware of the extent to which we are in receipt of benefits and indeed kept in existence by others. And then we need to allow that to affect our feelings. And then we need to allow our feelings to affect the way we live, so that we live more with that desire to contribute a bit more and a a bit less that desire to just get what we can. So how do we do that? Well, we could make it a practice to do that gratitude exercise. To do that gratitude exercise that we do on the beginner's course, maybe quite regularly. Sit down and just make a list. Start with mum and dad, teachers, and just call them to mind. Just call all those people to mind. That's becoming aware. That's one way we could do it. We could do what I know some people in the Sangha do, which is to keep a sort of gratitude diary. So I know that some people make it a practice at the end of the day to write down ways in which they've been benefited that day. And then look at that, call it back to mind. It's an exercise in becoming more aware. We could make recognition of the benefits received part of our metta bhavana practice. I hope we all do the metta bhavana. Choosing people who benefit us in some way, even people we don't like who benefit us in some way. Calling to mind the ways they do benefit us, and maybe even imagining ourselves thanking them in the metta bhavana, maybe even thanking them in real life, but certainly thanking them in, just as an expression of gratitude in the metta bhavana. It's a great way into metta. I'll say a bit more about that. So we allow that recognition, we cultivate that recognition of benefits we receive in any of those ways or in any others that you could think of. It's a really important part of our practice. And we allow them to turn into feelings of gratitude, and we allow those feelings to express themselves in a life that's at least a little bit more focused on what we can give back and a little less focused on what we can get for ourselves. Now, that might all sound a bit worthy. It might sound, well, that's all very well, but I'd rather be happy. It's going to limit our freedom, stop us from being happy, because we won't be able to follow our likes and dislikes, and we'll be having to sort of think about all these other people. But in fact, basing our life more on gratitude and solidarity with others is incredibly liberating. It's incredibly liberating. A life lived in solidarity with others and less focused on our own wants is just part and parcel of the secret of ordinary happiness, let alone the path to enlightenment, actually. Living, so a few ways, I could carry on indefinitely talking about why, but one way is that living more from gratitude frees us from hanging on to resentments and blame about what others haven't done for us, or even resentments and blame about what people have done for us, which was not very good. We need to let go of blame and resentment just to be an ordinarily happy human being, let alone to become an enlightened human being. And gratitude is the great antidote to blame and resentment, because it focuses us on what we get, not what we haven't got. And hanging on to blame and resentment is just a surefire way of making ourselves unhappy. And gratitude is the antidote to that. The Buddha likens hanging on to blame and resentment. He likens it to hanging on to a hot coal. It burns us, it hurts us, but we won't let go of it. And it doesn't, we're the person it hurts, not the person we're angry with. Yet we won't let go of it. So to do ourselves a favour, we just need to let go. We need to let go of blames and resentments. Also, gratitude is a great way into metta, and even a great way into joy. It opens up the heart, and it lifts the heart. It's part of the secret of happiness. And also, a life lived on the basis of what I have to give. What are my gifts? What are the gifts that I could give to the world? How can I contribute? Rather than, what can I get? What can I get for myself? Frees us up to live a more fulfilled life. A really fulfilled life is a life in which we use our gifts. We've all got different gifts. They're sometimes not well paid. If we think of what I could do that's well paid, it probably won't be using our gifts. Okay? It won't be the way we give a gift to the world. A fulfilling life is a life in which we use our gifts and express the person we are, rather than being slaves to economics. Being slaves to economics is really not very fulfilling. It's not the way to happiness. So those are some aspects of what a Buddha is like, that might not be quite so obvious as serenity, calm, and so on, but which are really central to what a Buddha is like, and which we can cultivate in ourselves. So to finish the evening, I'd like to talk about another aspect of what the Buddha is like, which is also brought out by an incident just after his enlightenment, and which is probably even more, you're even more unlikely to think of. In fact, it's probably quite shocking. And this is that a Buddha lives from an attitude of reverence and service. So, shortly after his enlightenment, what's more to say about it? Emotions like reverence. The reason I say it might be a bit shocking, emotions like reverence are denigrated in our culture. We've been strongly conditioned, I think, most of us in our society, to think that there is something wrong with feeling reverence and even admiration. There's a really strong trend. If there's somebody who is sort of slightly on a pedestal, somebody who's got some good features, and people start treating them as a role model, look for the feet of clay. Get them down, find the things wrong with them. Our society conditions us to think that we sort of demean ourselves and lose our dignity if we revere something outside of our own wants. Well, actually, it's very, very demeaning to live a life that's just based on your own little wants. So we say that metta becomes compassion when it meets suffering. That's a standard thing. And joy when it comes in contact with people's happiness. Well, in the same vein, reverence is what happens when a healthy metaphor mind meets something that it recognizes as higher and deeper and larger and more important than its own wants and needs. Its own small self as it is now with its little concerns. Reverence is what I think an emotionally healthy being feels when they experience the wonder and beauty and majesty of the world, when they're moved by art, when they connect with noble values and principles, and when they come across people who express and live by those values and principles. Reverence arises. And we need to open up to the emotions that a healthy being experiences when they come across something that's higher and more important than themselves, even if our society conditions us against it. Reverence and a sense of service are not demeaning. In fact, there's something very dignified and noble about a life that's lived in relationship to something that we recognize as higher than ourselves. So in that vein, shortly after his enlightenment, we're told the Buddha was reflecting, and in part of this long process of reflection, one of his reflections was that there is no human being who he could look up to anymore, in the sense of them having superior qualities to himself. There was nobody in his generation that he'd come across who was more ethical than him, had got a deeper vision than him. There was nobody he could look up to, admire and obey. Particularly puts emphasis on this obey, serve, obey. And we're told that he thought, in one translation it says, a man is unhappy if he has nothing to love, revere and obey. That would be a very strange thing for a lot of people to think of in our society, that a man is unhappy if they have nothing to love, revere and obey. But that's what the Buddha said. And I think the Buddha was probably enlightened. I think he was enlightened. So he was right. But in other words, if our life isn't about something bigger than our own wants and needs, we will be unhappy. And we're told that the Buddha thought, I will love, revere and obey the Dharma, with a capital D. I will serve the Dharma. And what the Buddha meant by Dharma here, it wasn't just his own teaching. He could hardly look up to a teaching, a set of words that he'd come up with himself. Dharma in Buddhism, in Indian languages, has multiple meanings. But at one level, it does mean the teachings of the Buddha, but at another level, it means the nature of the way things are. reality, the awe-inspiring nature of the universe we're part of, with its great beauty and its scary mystery and its mind-boggling hugeness. So the Buddha thought, to live a happy life, I need to serve, revere and serve something larger than myself. I will serve the very nature of the way things are. That reality, which is part of us, and which is also shines out from the beauty of the world around us. That's what I'm going to serve. We are part of that reality, so that can shine through us, but also we can relate to it in the world. Through, for example, the beauty we see in nature. So, we see the Buddha bowing in reverence and circumambulating the Bodhi tree. Most of us have been conditioned to think of the universe as a sort of dead machine. If it's not a human or perhaps an animal, it's a dead machine. Even some people relate to humans as dead machines, which is this automata. Don't have brains. Some people like to think of human beings like that, I suppose, because it gets us off the hook of being a bit more. But the Buddha clearly didn't see reality that way. He didn't see the universe that way. With his enlightened vision, with his Buddha eye, as it's called, he saw that there is something in the very nature of things that is worthy of reverence. I will revere the Dharma. I will revere the nature of things. The universe is not just a dead machine. There is something beautiful and awesome woven into the nature of reality, which shines out in its beauty. So the Buddha's gratitude and reverence extended even to what we would think of as the inanimate world. He bowed to the Bodhi tree and he circumambulated it in gratitude and reverence. I think it's also brought out by this earth-touching mudra that we see on the Buddha here, which a gesture he made in the run-up to his enlightenment when he's calling the earth goddess to support him. It seems to me that if you just look at the gesture itself, it's a gesture of connectedness to the world. I am supported by the earth, because the earth and I are part of the nature of things. We're both part of the nature of things. So I think maybe that's one aspect of the Dharma that the Buddha, the nature of things that the Buddha revered, is that we are part of the nature of things. The nature of things is part of us. So we can trust the nature of things. The nature of things is that consciousness exists. The nature of things is that consciousness evolves towards higher and higher levels. The nature of things rewards ethical actions. So if we live according to the nature of things, according to the Dharma, there is a current in the nature of things that will carry us towards greater and greater awareness and connection, higher and higher states towards enlightenment. When we first felt the urge to meditate and practice the Dharma, that was the nature of things giving us a prod. So I think that's maybe an aspect of the nature of things that the Buddha revealed. And perhaps another is that what I call the awe-inspiring nature of the universe. Many of us will experience a sense of reverence just being out in nature on our own. It inspires reverence with its great beauty and its scary mystery and its mind-boggling hugeness. So, as I've said, we Westerners often aren't very good at reverence because we're sort of taught not to, but we need to cultivate it if we're going to get very far. And maybe that's an aspect that can give us a way in, because many of us are much more open to reverence, a sense of reverence in nature, than we are reverence, for example, to human beings. Or for symbols like the Buddha. We can't help but feel reverence when we go out into the beauty of nature. We had a really interesting retreat a few years ago, which was on this subject, and I was talking about bowing as a way of connecting with reverence. You bow, it's like really difficult. It's like you're saying that something is bigger than me. You're saying there's something I value more than me. We do that perhaps in pujas, in devotional practice, but I remember an experience I had when I first started practicing the Dharma, actually, which was I felt I felt moved to bow to a view. There was a view. I felt moved to bow to it. So in this retreat, I suggested that people find something to bow to. And it was really quite funny because it's a beautiful place, Lockabrook, where we sometimes go for retreats. It's got this fabulous view. It's sunset, the sun's coming up. It's before meditation. And I went out there and there were all these people looking at the sunset. And every now and then one of them go. Perhaps opening up to that, valuing that sense of reverence that we can get out into nature, experience the awe, even bow to a view, bow to a landscape. So a few ways we could get into reverence. That's one, I think. Allow that to spill over. Allowing ourselves to revere actual people. Not playing along with this thing that if there's somebody who we can see really admirable qualities in, we have to find the feet of clay. Human beings we're all imperfect. We're all imperfect. If we relate to others through their feet of clay, well, what is it? It's a way of getting ourselves off the hook of being better ourselves, of becoming more like that ourselves. It's a way of protecting ourselves from, that person might actually have qualities I don't have. No. So yeah, just not doing that, just allowing ourselves to have heroes or heroines, have role models. Not feeling the need to look for the feet of clay. I mean, okay, now, we need to be careful about our heroes and heroines and role models. I mean, it's not about he can put a pass on a pound coin, into the centre of the field. It's not about he can make loads of money or he can really do his enemies down. We need to look for proper qualities of a really sound human being. But why not? There are lots of examples. There are lots of examples of people who live amazing lives and make amazing contributions. And why not revere? Why not respect and revere? So we can allow ourselves to have heroes, heroines, role models, not look for the feet of clay. If we look for someone perfect, we'll look for a long time. If we look for somebody who has qualities we don't have, they're all around. And cultivate that. A person is unhappy without reverence. That's what the Buddha tells us. So it could be actual people. We could actually allow ourselves to have respect for actual people we come into contact with. Teachers like Sangharashta, for example, or others. Allow ourselves to have at least respect. Think of them. Put them in our metta bhavana. Imagine bowing to them, at least in our mind. If you dare, express your respect. Express our respect when we see them. We could follow the Buddha's example and revere those who have benefited us. He even revered the tree. We could revere those who have benefited us. That teacher who made such a difference to my life. That friend who opened my eyes to something. We could revere them. So let's do that. I mean, I gave another talk on reverence in which I said that our normal approach is to be big me babies. It's all about me. And reverence is part of growing up. And I really believe that reverence is part of growing up. Gratitude is part of growing up. And a sense of solidarity with other beings is growing up. We grow up from children to adults, but we need to grow beyond just being an ordinary adult, if you like. That's what Buddhism is about. It's about growing towards an enlightened being. And part of that is going to be cultivating these properties which are part of what a Buddha is, which is living from gratitude, living from the sense of solidarity with others, wishing to make a contribution to the world rather than just get something back, and a sense of reverence for what's greater than ourselves, and a sense even of service to what's greater